Why is housing finance such a complicated issue? Housing finance happens to be the cornerstone on which everything housing is built. It is the creativity on which we make finance available that determines how successful any housing program or housing intervention will be, or how well it will trickle down. There is a demand side of finance, which is the person who needs the home, and there is a supply side, which is everyone involved in making the home available. Everything that happens on the demand side rests solely on income. And to put a hand around this, there are certain rule of thumbs that are used to determine what is the affordability bracket for certain level of incomes. The common rule of thumb says housing shouldn't be more than 30% of your income. But then, a lot of us are already paying more than that. Some are even spending almost 60% of their income on housing. And so it's a no-brainer that those people should already be able to access home ownership. But for them to be able to carry that rent money over to home ownership, it requires a down payment that most people cannot provide. The other rule of thumb says, before any lender can lend you money for home ownership, the cost of such housing should not exceed 2.5 times your annual family income. So if your family earns 1 million per month, means the total amount you can access in finance go to 30 million. But the trade-off is the lender oftentimes requires collateral or some sort of protection against risk of lending you such money, which oftentimes most middle income earners or low income earners do not have. So what about housing loan? Let's remember that a higher percentage of the population work within the informal sector that either has no such structure or not buoyant enough to provide adequate staff welfare. So that is that from the demand side. What happens on the supply side? Housing and building service providers are business organizations that are set up for profit. For every investment or commitment that goes into providing housing, there must be a return in form of profit for such investment, whether affordable housing or high value, high yield real estate investment. Bearing in mind that naturally, once it's a build and sell, then the unit economics of construction, the unit economics of overhead costs, of profit, of land, then has to be factored into the conversation. To make this affordable at below market rates for such suppliers, there has to be some sort of compensation or incentives that affords them the capacity to then let go of such investment at below market rate. And this is where subsidies come in. But before we get into how subsidies work, let's note that subsidy works for both demand and the supply side. And depending on the target income level or the income bracket, there are various alternatives of approach. So with all I've said, the long and short is it is difficult to marry these two sides, that is, the demand and the supply side of housing finance together. The main component of the demand side is income, while everything that influences the supply side is unit economy. It is not always as simple to then marry the realities of income to the realities of economy. And I hope this helps.